So I'm going to answer this one time. So I hope that it's bookmarked or something, because I'm not going to come back and answer this. This has been answered for thousands of years. And for some reason, this is not taught in schools to anybody. Well, I mean, for obvious reasons, but it's not talked about. And I'm going to just explain this. Let's say that a party of people, however many, a few hundred, go out to literally the middle of fucking nowhere. They try to find some place where there is nobody out there. Hasn't been anybody out there forever. And they're like, okay, fine. Hey, there's nobody out here. Let's build our civilization here. And they do that. And then along comes somebody, horseback saying, hey, hold on. You stole this land from us. Like, where have you been? You've been missing for many moons. So, how can you claim this was your land given that you're not really here doing anything with it? This is part of what's called common law. Common law is derivative of common sense. Common sense has been around for, a long time. Now, I realize most people are not taught common sense, but this is how this works. Think about the little kids. You have 2 little kids or 3 little kids or 50 little kids all playing, doing their own thing, and there's a toy in the corner that nobody's playing with. And one of the little kids says, oh, I'm going to go play with this toy. And then there's this huge argument about how, well, I was going to do that. What do we as adults say? Oh, he was there first and you weren't really doing anything with it, so fuck off. And that's what you would say. That's what I would say to the kids. Hey, you weren't really doing anything with it. You guys were all ignoring it. And this one kid decided to do something with it that you thought was interesting, and so now you're interested in it again. This happens all the time with land all over the world. Happens every time. You could get a bunch of people together, go out, and for example, let's say that you did that whole, do you remember that Chaz bullshit in Seattle? I grew up in Seattle, so I know the Capitol Hill district pretty well. And there was this whole thing where they took over the Capitol Hill district and said, we're going to declare this our own land. And they declared it basically by right of conquest. Well, sure, if they could hold it, then yeah, they could keep it by right of conquest. But like Theon Greyjoy, they couldn't hold it and they soon lost. Well, what if that same group of people decided to develop their own skills and instead go out into the so-called wilderness, wherever it is, whether it's desert or woods, it doesn't matter, anywhere where there isn't a bunch of other people, and say, hey, we're going to claim this by right of conquest, and we're going to develop our civilization. That would actually be legitimate. I would consider that to be a legitimate claim, even here in these United States, because, once again, the United States falsely claims land ownership as a country of a bunch of land and then says, this is all ours. And it's like, well, hold on, what do you mean ours? Because the average American doesn't really own all that land. Well, no, it's a national reserve. Fuck you. There's no such thing as a so-called private preserve. This argument has been had throughout all of human history. You don't get to say that, well, I was going to do something with that land someday, maybe, possibly. No, you weren't. You weren't going to do shit. You were never going to do shit. I live in Houston, Texas. There are pieces of land in downtown fucking Houston that have not been used since Texas became a state, and they will never be used by whoever claims they own them. Fact is, those should be right of conquest because nobody's going to do anything with them. Well, but that goes against private property. There's a difference between so-called private property and personal property. This distinction is really important. Personal property or business property that you are using for your, where you live and to conduct your business, that's a completely different set of rules, at least in my view. Now, we haven't had this discussion in this country for a very long time, largely because I think that people don't know how to have this discussion. They think that, well, okay, then what if somebody buys it? Buys it from whom? You could make that argument for, Gil Bates. I guess you can't say his name on the internet because if you say his actual name, then no one sees the video or something, so you have to make up a name for him. So here's his super kit, Gil Bates. You could say, is he really using all that farmland? No, he's not. Is it right for conquest? It should be. And under common sense, common law, etc. This is, by the way, one of the things that all of you championed, and I covered this back when you were talking about the so-called squatters' rights. I pointed out that the so-called idea behind squatters' rights is actually part of the right of adverse possession, which, once again, if no one's there and you're like, all right, I'm going to just do this because there's nobody else here, and then someone shows up however many eons later and says, this is mine, and I was going to do something even though I don't actually live here and I don't even remember actually owning this property. Yeah, that's how that works. There's actually a dickhead up in Oklahoma who apparently owned so much land that he didn't even realize that people had been living on, quote, his land, close quote, for something like 8 years, and then decided that, oh no, I got to kick these so-called squatters off of my land, even though he didn't remember. And if he had that much land, if he didn't know there were people living on it, I would suggest that he doesn't really actually own that. This is once again a conversation that is never probably going to be had on any kind of deep and meaningful level because most people don't know how to articulate any of it. To your point about the idea of so-called stolen land, I'm assuming that you're trying to apply that once again to the so-called natives in the U.S. I would apply the same rules there. It's just like the argument that people make that they say, well, the spotted owl needs 700,000 acres of woods to mate, whereas human beings have been able to figure out how to do it in the back of a Camaro since at least the 60s. So I find that to be bullshit that human beings need something like, oh, well, the native tribes needed 400 zillion acres as a private preserve. No, they didn't. And that's the end of that. And, that was decided handily by pretty much the settlers that came here. And it will be decided again, depending on if you want to keep your land or not. We'll see.